Dana stood inside the belly of the Black Hawk, heat pressing down from above as the aircraft idled before liftoff. Her flight suit was already damp across the back and under the arms, dark streaks climbing along the spine where the harness dug in. The gloves, clipped to her belt, were still clean. That would change soon enough. She reached for the M240 mounted beside her, not for reassurance, but because the motion helped settle the weight sitting low in her chest. She didn't belong in this seat. Not really. Dana had trained as a crew chief, knew her way around hydraulic lines and belt feeds, but she had never fired the door gun in live conditions. She'd been flying as a backup to a senior pilot until yesterday, when everything fractured. A rocket blast in the hills north of the airfield had left one bird grounded, its gunner taken out on impact. No one else available. So now she was it, reassigned on the roster with no ceremony and no questions. A crewman passed behind her, stepping toward the back ramp. Dana kept her grip on the weapon and let the others talk. They were younger, mostly medevac specialists. None of them asked where she'd come from. That silence told her everything. She didn't wear the insignia they expected. She wasn't one of them. But for the next hour, they'd have to trust she could do the job. The cabin vibrated as the pilot throttled up. The rotors began to cut the air in long, rising beats. Dana pressed her shoulder against the doorframe and looked out. Light glared across the tarmac, washing everything in bleached gray and dull heat. The Apache that would ride Escort lifted off first, banking slightly before leveling out over the perimeter road. Dana followed it with her eyes until the nose dipped and it vanished ahead of them. Then they were rising too, the Black Hawk lifting in staggered bounce, tires pulling free from the ground with a grunt. Dana adjusted the feed tray on the gun, felt the subtle clunk as the rounds settled into place. Her body leaned slightly into the curve of the doorway. The ground dropped away. The first part of the flight passed quiet. The team stayed mostly silent, heads bent over equipment or gazing out the windows. Dana kept her posture fixed, eyes scanning the horizon, but her thoughts circled tighter. She didn't think about getting hit. She thought about getting it wrong, watching the wrong direction, hesitating when it counted. That was the line she feared most. The Apache flew ahead in a wide arc, their lead protection through a corridor that hadn't been hot for weeks. That was the problem. The area had gone quiet too fast. Something about it felt off, but they'd been called for a high-priority pickup, a SEAL wounded on mission. Dana had read only a fragment of the med brief. Chest trauma, limited time, no ground extraction possible. They had to land. The Apache peeled wide around a ridge. Then something flickered. Dana saw it before she heard it. A streak in the air, low and fast, then a split second of quiet. No one spoke. No one moved. It was the kind of silence that locked a room before the noise came. The explosion landed like a slap inside her ribcage. The Apache lurched violently, its tail twisted sideways, and a sheet of flame folded over its body as it dipped nose first. Dana's mouth was open, but no sound came out. The shock rolled over them half a second later, rocking their bird to the side and jolting the entire cabin. Voices erupted over the headset, some clear, others cut with static. One of the medics dropped to a crouch, instinct more than plan. The co-pilot shouted for status, trying to stabilize as the Black Hawk dipped briefly and then steadied. Dana gripped the door frame and saw the Apache spiral behind a hill, already trailing smoke. No parachutes, no flare. The crew chief's voice was calm, almost flat. The Apache was down. They had to continue alone. Dana didn't speak. She shifted her body forward, adjusted the tray, and looked out again. The landscape hadn't changed, but something in the light had. It was colder, sharper. The mission hadn't even begun, and now it was theirs alone. She reached down without looking and unclipped her gloves, slid them on slowly, smoothing each finger into place. They didn't feel clean anymore, just unused. She pulled the charging handle once, then again, and felt the weapon click into readiness beneath her hands. The headset crackled, 90 seconds to the zone. Nobody said a word to her, and she didn't need them to. The others were busy now, prepping stretchers, calling in landing data, checking bandages. Dana stayed where she was, one hand steadying her against the flexing deck, the other resting on the feed cover. Heat climbed the inside of her suit, sticking to her back like a second skin. In that moment, there was nothing left to prepare. Everything from here on would come without warning. And when it did, she would already be in the seat, holding the line. No choice, no time, just the job in front of her. The landing zone was nothing but dust and heat. The moment the Black Hawk dropped into hover, the world outside the open door disappeared in a thick, blinding swirl of grit. Rotor blades hammered the air in rhythmic violence, sending waves of brown-out sand curling up around the aircraft like a slow collapse. Dana braced against the doorframe, the M240 pressed against her shoulder. Her vision narrowed to vague motion in a cloud that stretched no more than a few feet in any direction. She couldn't see the ground, couldn't see the SEALs they were here for. All she had was the heat bleeding through her gloves, the weight of the trigger beneath her hand, and the vibrations rolling up from the frame into her spine. Her helmet was off. No headset chatter now. Just the thud of the rotors and the grind of sand being flung against metal. A medic knelt behind her, steadying gear in the floor brackets. He said something she didn't catch, voice lost in the roar. She didn't answer. She kept her eyes locked forward, scanning shadows that shifted but never quite formed. Shapes moved in the murk, but she couldn't tell if they were trees, men, or tricks of the light. Her gloves, still mostly clean minutes ago, now bore streaks of dust and faint smudges where sweat and grime soaked through. The first real sign came in pieces, a flicker on the edge of the swirl, a figure shouldering another across uneven ground, then another, crouched low, rifle slung tight to his chest. Dana spotted the reflective glint on their gear just long enough to be sure they were friendlies. The SEALs were coming in. They moved with brutal economy, hauling a man who sagged between them, one arm hanging limp and the other across a shoulder. Dana adjusted her grip. The M240's body shifted slightly as she braced her left foot into the doorframe for stability. A moment later, the first pop of incoming fire cracked through the brownout. Small arms, not heavy, but close. She didn't wait for confirmation. She squeezed the trigger, sending the first burst into the haze on the side the fire had come from. Muzzle flash lit the inside of the cabin for a second, painting the medics in gold light as they knelt by the stretcher rig. Dana kept her body still, relying on sound and instinct now. The fire came again, short bursts from rifles ahead and to the left. She swept the weapon across that arc, firing in staggered control, not wasting rounds, not guessing, only reacting. Shell casings rattled off the deck, a few striking her boot as she pivoted slightly, leaning harder into the harness. The sound of her own weapon was overwhelming, even without the headset. It lived in her chest, in her neck, in the space between each pulse of her breath. She spotted another figure in the haze, not one of theirs. Low posture, moving too fast and too angled to be part of the SEAL team. She fired a burst high to the right, forcing the figure to drop and disappear behind the distortion. Dust swallowed everything again. The Black Hawk shifted, pilot compensating for wind and incoming fire. The aircraft dropped slightly, rotors slicing new holes in the haze. Dana didn't flinch. Her entire body had locked into place. She wasn't sure how long she'd been holding tension like this, only that if she stopped, she might lose the shape of the moment. The SEALs breached the final few yards to the ramp. Two of them shouted toward the crew, motioning the medics forward. Dana watched one of the medics signal back, then slide down to the edge of the cargo bay. The wounded man was limp, his vest streaked with dirt, and what looked like blood already drying dark on the shoulder. One of the SEALs kept his weapon trained on the haze behind him. The other helped the medic start the load. A burst of fire ripped across the left flank. Dana swung with it, instinct firing faster than thought. She laid down a 5-round burst into the section just behind the approaching SEALs. The light from her muzzle cast a fast, stuttering glow across their boots and the dragging legs of the man they carried. Someone yelled again, this time clearer, nearer. It was the crew chief calling for a brace. The bird dipped again, holding a hard hover no more than a few feet off the ground now. Dana steadied her right hand across the top of the gun, checked the belt feed, and watched for movement. She didn't think about where the next shot might come from. She didn't have time. Her decisions weren't coming from planning or strategy anymore. They were being pulled out of her, shaped by the pace of motion and the edge of what she could feel. The SEALs cleared the ramp. The medics grabbed the downed man and began cutting away gear. One of them shouted for vitals, the other for pressure dressing. Dana shifted her posture again and fired a short burst toward the tree line, or what she guessed might be tree line through the mix of shadow and dust. Another echo of small arms fire answered, but farther off now. Slower. The dust hadn't cleared, but her vision was adjusting to it. She no longer saw it as blind. It was just different light, different motion. You moved when you could, held still when you had to. And right now, she had to move. Her hand came back to the feed cover. Another figure flickered in the periphery. She didn't fire this time. It was one of the SEALs rejoining the others inside. The man's face was streaked with sweat and ash. He didn't look at her. He just knelt near the wounded and took over pressure on the wound. Dana let herself breathe once. The bird was still holding. The dust was still everywhere. But her job hadn't changed. She kept her body locked in place, eyes back on the haze, finger ready again. The cargo bay rocked slightly under Dana's boots as the Black Hawk held its low hover, the rotors chewing the air into a grinding roar above them. She shifted her stance to stay locked into the doorframe, eyes cutting through the swirl of dust that refused to settle. Visibility was barely more than a few yards, just enough to catch movement in slices. She had to read motion more than shapes. Shadows flicked, disappeared, reappeared again in the haze. Friend or threat? It would come down to instinct. Two SEALs emerged from that swirl carrying the wounded man between them, boots slamming the ramp in urgency. The limp figure sagged, head low, blood soaking the side of his chest and dripping from his gear. Dana kept the M240 trained outward, tracking the cloud beyond them, never flinching toward the sound behind her. The medics moved fast, sliding past her as they cleared space and grabbed hold of the downed man. One of the SEALs stayed at the edge of the bay, rifle raised, sweeping for threats. The other two dropped to their knees near the casualty. Dana heard one of them shouting for vitals and pressure, but the voice was swallowed by rotor noise and distance. The rest was movement gloves slapping pouches, shears cutting gear, someone trying to find a pulse. Another round of fire cracked in from the left. Dana snapped to it and returned with a tight burst, watching the impact arc into the dust. No time to confirm hits. No time to wonder who or how many. The only thing that mattered was suppressing whatever was out there before it reached the bird. She lifted her eyes just long enough to spot a shape skimming across the haze. Not friendly. The posture gave it away too quick, low to the ground, angling toward cover. She fired a controlled burst. The shape disappeared. She didn't see it fall, just vanish into the blur. The feed jammed. A sharp clunk told her something caught in the belt. She swore under her breath, yanked the cover, and shoved the belt forward with both hands. The edge of a round had deformed, catching the feed. Her gloves smeared red across the tray. Blood she hadn't realized was there until she looked down. The belt cleared. She slammed the cover down and chambered the next round. The whole process took 4 seconds, maybe 5, long enough for the rest of the team to start moving the wounded man again. The SEAL's boot dragged across the floor, leaving a dark, gritty trail. The medics worked without pausing, lifting him as one reached under to keep pressure on the chest wound. Someone yelled for cover. Dana didn't look back. She knew what they meant. More fire came in from the right this time. Not precise, nervous. Fast. Too many rounds. But it was close. She shifted again, pressed her left knee into the floor for balance, and fired across the angle. The muzzle flash lit the interior of the bay, throwing fast shadows behind her and catching the medic's face in brief flare. He didn't look up. Dana couldn't tell if her rounds were hitting anything. That wasn't the point anymore. The goal was space. Time. She had to keep the threat distant until the crew finished the load. No one else was watching the perimeter. It was her and the dust. A new shape moved in the cloud. Closer. This one came in quick, ducking low, almost sprinting between cover points she couldn't see. There was no call to fire, no voice in her ear. Just the second her gut told her it was wrong. She fired 3 short bursts. The figure dropped, but again. The haze swallowed everything before she could confirm. Her breathing stayed steady, but her jaw had locked. She didn't notice it until the gun recoiled slightly harder than expected, and she realized her shoulders were pulling tight into the stock. The dust stung her eyes. Grit filled the corners of her mouth. She tasted metal and ash and something sour from her own breath. The bird dipped slightly as the pilot adjusted position. Dana caught her balance before it threw her weight sideways. The medics were almost done. One had stabilized the seal's airway. The other was still working the chest seal. Blood had pooled between the floor braces and now crept toward her boot. Slow, but steady. A burst of rounds struck near the tail. Dana turned instantly, swept the gun toward the rear quarter, and fired a 5-round burst into the cloud. Nothing answered. Silence returned, heavy and close. For a moment, all she heard was the creaking of the harness over her shoulders and the constant thump of the rotor above. One of the SEALs glanced back at her, just a flick of the head. Not thanks, not warning, just acknowledgement. She didn't respond. Her gloves were soaked now, the right one nearly black with blood and grease from the belt. She shifted her stance again. Scan the tree line, or where she guessed the tree line was, and waited for the next shape to appear. Nothing came. Not yet. The medics lifted the wounded man again and started strapping him down. The SEALs stayed low, weapons aimed out. The whole bird felt like it was holding its breath. Dana did the same. She didn't move, didn't speak. She simply stayed in position. One knee pressed to the floor. Trigger hand relaxed but ready. The feed belt twitched slightly in the rotor wash. Spent casings littered around her. The outside world stayed hidden, but that didn't mean it had disappeared. The lull came with weight, not peace. The incoming fire had gone quiet for 20 seconds, maybe 30, enough time to feel the strain in her knees, the blood crusting under her gloves, the heat trapped inside her collar. Dana stayed locked in her position, the M240 steady in her grip, its barrel still hot, the feed tray smoking faintly. The rotors pounded the air above them, beating it into haze that refused to lift. The brownout never fully cleared. It thickened, shifted, reshaped itself like something alive. Behind her, the medics were still working. One of them yelled for the clotting agent. The other had his hands inside the wounded SEAL's vest, voice tight as he called out a pressure number that Dana barely heard. The pilot's voice came over the headset, edged and loud. He needed a decision now. They were exposed, burning fuel, engines strained, holding the hover. The crew chief responded with one word: 30. That's how long they needed. Dana shifted her footing and scanned left to right. Her eyes stung from the dust, but she blinked through it. The silence didn't feel right. It wasn't retreat. It was build-up. A flicker of movement caught her eye. Far edge of the haze, low and deliberate. A single figure moved through the fog, not running, not stumbling, intentional, controlled. No weapon visible, but that didn't matter. The posture alone made her stomach tense. She hesitated. Just a second, enough to try to make out details. Uniform civilian. Too much dust to tell. The shape dropped something into the dirt, then turned and ran. Dana's hands moved before her mind caught up. She shouted a bearing toward the cockpit and lifted the M240 a few degrees. She didn't fire. Not yet. She was bracing, shifting, drawing in a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Then the ground kicked upward. A sharp, dirty blast rolled through the perimeter. Not a clean mortar too short, too shallow. Some kind of improvised charge or thrown device, close enough that it threw dust inside the cargo bay, coating everything in a new layer of grit. Dana was on her side for a second, the impact tilting her across the threshold of the door. Her shoulder slammed the metal brace, but she kept her hands on the weapon. The aircraft dipped, stabilized, then wavered again. The pilot's voice came back, this time cracked by interference. His words cut in and out, but Dana caught enough. Decision point. Either lift now or risk another blast inside 50 meters. The crew didn't answer. They were too busy working the straps across the stretcher. One medic called out a pulse, the other locked in a seal. One of the SEALs crouched by the ramp with his rifle raised, jaw tight as he scanned the rear arc. Dana's voice came next, low but clear enough to cut through. Movement east, direction confirmed, threat level unknown. The pilot acknowledged. The rotors surged higher. Dana pushed herself upright, planted one knee, and reset the weapon. Her gloves were completely caked now. Blood, dust, grit, the grease from the feed cover. She worked the belt forward again, chambered a new round, and rolled her shoulder to keep the ache from locking in. Another shape moved in the haze, this one closer, not rushing, not fast, just there. She called it out again, the same direction, still not firing, still unsure. Then something glinted a reflection off what might have been glass or metal. Dana fired. A burst. Controlled. Just enough to disrupt whatever was lining up behind the dust. The figure dropped. No return fire. No confirmation. Just another stretch of silence that hung longer than it should have. The pilot asked again. The crew chief answered this time. 20 more seconds. The aircraft pitched slightly, fighting to stay level. Dana caught herself on the brace bar with her left hand, keeping the weapon raised. The dust outside pulsed with light from the rear flare, flickering through the haze as one of the SEALs moved into position by the ramp. A third shape shifted at the edge of visibility. Smaller, maybe crawling. Dana did not call it out. She didn't hesitate. She fired again, a sweep across the low ground, spacing the rounds with precision rather than panic. The M240 kicked and hissed, brass bouncing off the deck beside her boots. One casing struck her knee and rolled toward the blood pooling in the cargo bay. Another voice behind her yelled clear. The medics were off the floor. The stretcher was locked. The SEALs were back at the ramp. Dana kept her weapon raised. Nothing moved beyond the haze. Nothing new crossed into her view. The pilot was already climbing. The Black Hawk began to rise, slowly at first, the brownout thickening as the blades bit harder into the air. Visibility dropped to almost zero. But Dana didn't blink. She kept the weapon trained on the last known point of movement. Her gloves still braced on the feed tray, her knees aching against the floor. The echo of the explosion still lingered in her ears, more vibration than sound. She felt it in her ribs, in her jaw, in the back of her teeth. It hadn't killed them. Not this time. But it had come close enough to leave an imprint. She glanced at the feed tray once more. Smoke curled off the metal. She didn't wipe it down. She just reached forward, adjusted the belt, and checked the chamber again. They weren't clear yet. The next decision would come just as fast as the last. The call came sharp from the medic clear. The word barely reached over the roar of the blades, but Dana heard it. It marked the transition point, the moment they were meant to be climbing, pulling out, leaving this place behind. She shifted her stance and rolled her shoulders once, getting ready for the upward pitch. The wounded SEAL was strapped down, vitals low but stable. Everyone was on board. Then the side of the Black Hawk lit up with muzzle flashes from the haze. Automatic fire hammered the airframe. The aircraft jolted as rounds struck somewhere behind her. She didn't look back. Instinct flattened her posture, one hand pulling her down into a low stance, the other keeping the weapon steady. A sharp sting cracked across her cheek, something small. Maybe grit or a metal shard, tearing through the dust and catching her in the skin. It didn't matter. She blinked it away. The pilot was already pulling power. The engine changed pitch. Climbing hard, Dana dropped to one knee, the floor cold and gritty beneath her. Her glove, caked in blood and dust, slammed down on the feed tray as she re-anchored the M240. Her body moved with mechanical precision. There was no pause between impact and return fire. She opened up again. 3 bursts. Tight and fast, each one bracketed to suppress where the incoming had originated. The light from her muzzle strobed across the interior. It caught the edge of a medic's elbow, the curve of a stretcher rail, the silver glint of sweat on someone's cheek. Dana didn't see it. Her eyes were fixed outside. A shape shifted in the smoke, just enough motion to confirm direction. She fired again, controlled, deliberate. Shell casings clattered across the bay, bouncing under her knees, rolling into the pooled blood below the stretcher. The enemy fire slackened, but did not stop. It came in flickers now, desperate arcs trying to reach the aircraft before it could lift clear. Dana held her fire for a heartbeat, then returned it with another burst. Her jaw was clenched, her pulse loud in her ears. The weapon's recoil was steady against her shoulder, predictable in a way nothing else was. The rotors were dragging them upward now, inch by inch. Dust surged under them, spun into a spiral that licked around the cargo ramp and curled up into the bay. It blurred the light. Every breath tasted like grit and metal. Then one more muzzle flash flared in the haze. It came from the right side, low to the ground. A final shot not sustained. Just a last attempt to land around before they were gone. Dana rotated, shifting her weight across the deck, and returned fire without hesitation. The belt clicked as it fed. Her glove, still pressed into the tray, left a dark print on the metal. Someone behind her shouted. She caught the word flare. A red signal burst upward through the haze. It cut a hard line into the smoke, marking the dust off as hot. No one on the ground needed further confirmation. The mark said everything. The Black Hawk surged higher. Air whipped past her in heavy, dirty layers. Smoke and sand clawed across her face, wrapped around her boots, swirled between her fingers. She didn't flinch. Her finger rested on the trigger. Slack now, but ready. The incoming fire stopped. There was no final explosion, no last contact. Just silence growing in their wake as the ground pulled away and the figures in the haze vanished beneath the churn of air. Dana stayed on one knee. Her body rocked slightly with the climb. The aircraft was tilting now, banking to gain altitude faster. A medic sat down hard behind her, back against the bulkhead, gloves resting on his knees. One of the SEALs exhaled with a sound that might have been relief or pain. She couldn't tell. No one spoke directly to her. The belt had fed clean. The weapon hadn't jammed again. Her right hand stayed loose on the feed tray. The imprint of her bloody glove was now baked into the warmth of the metal, dust thick around the edges. The flare still hung in the air behind them, glowing red through the smoke. Dana shifted her weight slightly, letting the weapon rest as the aircraft leveled out. She didn't take off her gloves. She didn't lean back. She simply stayed in the door, eyes still fixed on the place they had just left. Courage wasn't what she had felt in the moment. It wasn't something she noticed. It had been movement, breath, a reaction without pause. She hadn't thought. She had acted. And because they were climbing now, not bleeding out on the field below. The Black Hawk leveled out at altitude, the shudder of the climb easing into a steady hum. The air inside the cabin was thick with grit, sweat, and the copper tang of blood. No one said anything. The rotors kept turning overhead, steady now, their rhythm slower, more distant with each mile placed between them and the landing zone. The SEAL on the stretcher was still breathing. Barely. A medic stayed crouched by his side, fingers on the pressure dressing, eyes scanning vitals. The other sat back against the bulkhead, his chest rising and falling hard, trying to settle into some kind of rhythm again. Dana stayed where she was. She didn't speak, didn't turn. She kept her hands on the weapon, then reached slowly for the belt. It was nearly spent. She pulled a fresh one from the rack, unhooked it with one hand, and started feeding it forward. The action was smooth, practiced, Automatic. Her gloves left streaks on the ammo box and darker smudges across the receiver housing. Blood had dried on the fabric now, flaking at the fingertips, the color lost in the grime. The co-pilot looked back from the front seat. His eyes met hers through the narrow sliver of window just behind the console. He didn't speak either. He just looked at her for a second longer than necessary, then turned back around. That was enough. Outside the side window, the light was fading. Dusk leaned in over the ridgelines, far off. A faint trail of smoke twisted into the sky from somewhere near where they had lifted out. It wasn't clear whether it came from the crash site or the field they had hovered over. It didn't matter. The bird was still flying. The patient was still alive. And no one was dead inside the cabin. Dana slid the last of the belt into place and closed the feed cover. The M240 clicked shut beneath her hand. She gave it one final check, then rested her palm against the receiver. She didn't take her gloves off. She didn't stand. She just kept watch through the open door, the cold edge of the wind brushing past her gear. There was no victory in her chest, no adrenaline left to burn, only the awareness that they weren't finished. There would be another call, another lift, another landing. She didn't need to prepare for it. She was already in the seat. In the end, Dana asked for nothing. She did not speak loudly, did not seek credit, and never expected anyone to understand what it took to hold that line alone. But in the silence after the fire, when the weight of the moment settled, it was clear. Her strength came not from rank or role, but from showing up fully in a job she never asked for. She didn't need to be seen to make it count. Her worth was never about the noise. It was the choice to stay steady when others looked away. This story is for anyone who's ever stood firm when no one was watching. For those who lead by action, not applause. If that resonates with you, take a moment to reflect. Share your thoughts in the comments, or follow for more stories that honor quiet strength, grounded resolve, and the power of being exactly who you are.